Hello and welcome to Redaction Report's News Roundup. Sorry we weren't with you last week, but for various reasons, all of us who are usually involved in this were unavailable. Sorry about that, but these will be regular weekly roundups for as much as we can make them. Today we are going to be looking at a few topics that have popped up since we were last on air. One of which is the results of the Canadian election. We're also going to be looking at Keir Starmer's party conference speech, which took place today on the day we're recording. I'm joined by Richard Hansen today. Richard, how you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, mate. Yeah, it's nice to be back after a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Canada to start with, shall we? So this was the federal election that just took place in Canada. It took place only 2 years after the previous one. It was a snap election called by Justin Trudeau, who wanted to get the majority government that eluded him last time to help push through his COVID recovery plan. He leads the Liberal Party, which is sort of a centre to centre-left party. His main rival was Erin O'Toole of the Conservative Party of Canada, who's been characterised more as a moderate within that party. However, basically nothing changed. Trudeau still has a minority government. The Conservatives, I think exactly the same number of seats they had going into the election. They managed to hold. The New Democrats, a left-wing party under Jagmeet Singh, gained 1 seat. Begs the question, what was the point?
I know. I mean, I was thinking that maybe Justin Trudeau and Theresa May should have a glass of something together. I mean, I could see Trudeau's logic in the sense that, you know, he obviously needed to get this COVID recovery plan through the House of Commons, but he looked around the world. There are examples in the world where, you know, the COVID pandemic has helped incumbents. I mean, from personal experience, if you look at Jacinda Ardern's Labour government in New Zealand, I mean, the election in New Zealand in October of last year, nearly 12 months ago, Labour managed to secure an overwhelming overall majority in that house. So, you know, there are historical precedents. But that being said, the electorate do not, and I don't care where you are around the world, electorates don't react well to snap polls, to snap elections, and for no other reason other than to just shore up a majority because maybe the polls are looking good, especially during a pandemic in this sense. I mean, in the New Zealand election, obviously there was zero COVID in the community at the time that it occurred. Obviously, that's not the same in Canada. So, you know, making Canadians go out and vote en masse in an election when he could have quite easily waited 2 more years, 1 more year even. I'm sure in a year's time there'll be more freedoms. Just to end up where we started. And I mean, then we're not even talking about the amount of money that these things cost. Elections cost hundreds of millions of pounds. So yeah, we've just ended up where we've started. And to be honest, I mean, the polls looked pretty dire for him for a while. It looked for a while almost like the Conservatives were going to be able to form a minority government. Certainly not a majority, but it may have been enough to no longer have Trudeau as Prime Minister anymore. Obviously, it didn't occur. But yeah, just like you said, what was the point? I don't know.
Well, it's worth pointing out that the Conservatives won the popular vote. And not only did they win the popular vote this time, they won it last time as well. So of the 3 elections that Trudeau's now won, 2 of them he lost the popular vote in. Of course, Canada also has first past the post, much like the UK. Although it's worth pointing out that even though the Conservatives were often doing quite well in the party polls in the run-up to the election, Trudeau was mostly still winning in the preferred prime minister polls, which, if you look at parliamentary democracies as a whole, sort of preferred prime minister polls usually actually tend to be a better indication of how elections are going to go than the party vote.
And especially in these times of pandemic, when you've got a kind of rally around the leader kind of thing going on. As an opposition leader, even during an election, it's very hard to have any cut through when you're not. It's not up to you to make COVID policy and to make decisions that are going to affect everybody's daily lives on quite a regular basis. Yeah, like you say, you know, he lost the popular vote, so he needs to give Theresa May a call and have a glass of something. Then he needs to call the ex-president of the United States, Donald Trump, have a beer with him and maybe George W. Bush from 2000. So there are
Well,
plenty
I believe both of those former presidents are teetotalers, so maybe not a beer in their case.
Well, yeah, maybe a Diet Dr. Pepper, Diet Coke for Donald Trump, and root beer or something for George Bush. Yeah. That being said, I don't think you want to see George W. Bush after a night on the sauce, as it were.
But yeah, moving on from Canada, then let's move to the UK. Another place with that's straddled with first past the post still. It's currently party conference season over here. The Liberal Democrats have had their party conference already.
Have they?
You beat me to making that joke. Okay, but today the big news of the day politically was Labour's party conference. Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, gave his keynote speech today. It was quite long, I think it's fair to say.
Delegates must have had sore hands from the amount of clapping that they needed to do in what was it, 90 plus minutes of chat.
It was roughly that, wasn't it? Though not everyone in the hall was on board with Starmer, though. There was quite a lot of heckling. What do you make of this?
Well, it was always going to be a thing, given how split Labour are. But I personally think that Starmer handled it quite well. I mean, I know that we've got reservations about Starmer for various reasons, and I know that you and I have even respectfully disagreed about certain things. But I think he obviously was expecting it. Obviously, I mean, it'd be silly if you didn't. And he had some pre-prepared lines. I think he shone the best when did he say something like don't throw slogans, make change, or something, when
it was something like that, yeah.
Corbynistas were holding up red placards and various things.
I think they were shouting about the £15 minimum wage as well.
Yeah, and obviously he had the advantage. The thing is that somebody like Starmer obviously has much more support in the parliamentary party than Corbyn ever did. It was just that Corbyn had huge amounts of support in the grassroots. So in terms of numbers in the conference hall, Starmer is always going to have 80% of the support in the hall, just of the delegates. So when you've got the numbers, as it were, he is able to just say things and have an amount of applause drown out those hecklers. I think it's important for Starmer to start to do this. I think that the Labour Party are going to wear quite thin. You're going to the patience is going to wear quite thin now that we're kind of the pandemic is arguably behind us, at least in the sense that we are allowed to have in-person contact now. Obviously, the conference was in person now, so Starmer is going to have to start making some headway in the polls, and I think he's started well. He's able to now say that our priority is taking government. Our priority is winning, and it certainly is refreshing to my ears anyway. It's just hear from a Labour Party that is focused on getting back into government, perhaps at the expense of some ideological purity, but that remains to be seen.
I mean, the one thing that strikes me about it, and I think I can see where Starmer was going here. Like I say, a lot of hecklers were shouting about the £15 minimum wage. And here's the thing, as a lot of people point out, and they pointed it out in the wake of 2019's result as well, a lot of the policies that Labour are putting forward are popular. It's just the Labour leadership at the time was not trusted to implement them. And if you look at Starmer's polling at the moment, he's currently not doing that great in the leadership approval either. Although I did see one recently where Boris Johnson's approval had dropped substantially to make the gap smaller, might have even flattened it entirely. But that's a conversation for another time. If you look at a lot of polls that ask, does Keir Starmer look like a prime minister in waiting? It's pretty overwhelmingly a no. And one thing that struck me about this speech is a lot of it, he was talking about himself. Now, a lot of people have been criticizing him for this, saying, where's all this discussion about policy? But I think it comes back to that point again about the preferred prime minister polling. If you look at Canada, Starmer needs to be putting himself out there as a prime minister in waiting now.
Yes.
We know the policies are popular, and hopefully come election time, we're going to be seeing a very solid core of the domestic policies promised in 2017 and 2019 kept in that manifesto. What we need is a politician who's going to present it in a way that's compelling to the electorate. And hopefully Starmer presenting himself like he was talking about, he was talking about his background, how he was the son of a tool maker, and threw in a dig at Boris Johnson as well, I believe, along those lines. He's kind of characterized in the media and at large as kind of a bit boring, a bit sort of, a bit wishy-washy and a bit spineless. He needs to counter that image. First impressions count. He's not had a good first impression. Is it too late to change it? I mean, I have an awful feeling it might be, but hopefully it's not. And I think it was a good speech.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think first impressions definitely count. But I think that it's difficult for Labour with such a long lead time. Yeah, I think I probably mentioned this on podcasts before. 5-year election cycle here in the UK. Obviously, the last general election was in 2019. Jeremy Corbyn was the head of the Labour Party then. Obviously, he stepped down as a result of the crushing defeat. But now, Keir Starmer has had 4.5 years to be the leader of the opposition. But that also means that the Conservatives have had 4.5 years to paint Keir Starmer with
4.5 years,
whatever
sorry?
brush. Well, 5 years minus the 6 months before the election, as in before the 2024 general election. If
I see. They will have had. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
They will have had 4.5 years to paint Starmer in the way that they want to, and there are obviously helpful members of the press to do so. I think an interesting electoral strategy for me, if Labour want to think about getting into power, is to change leader fairly swiftly before the next general election. I know there's risks to that. I think if you look at, I talk about historical precedent and I talk about my homeland, Jacinda Ardern, who was first elected in 2017 as Prime Minister in a minority government, was elected leader of the Labour Party one day before the general election is called. One day. So I know we don't have a Fixed Term Parliament Act in New Zealand, so it is it's up to the Prime Minister to contact the Governor General to make it to call an election. But Bill English, who was the leader of the National Party at the time, was certain that he was going to be running against the previous Labour leader. Well, he came back from Government House, and it turned out that he was running against Jacinda Ardern. There's a similar precedent in the 1980s in Australia when Bob Hawke in 1983 became Prime Minister. He became leader of the Labour Party a day or two before the election was called. So I think at the moment, obviously we digress, we're looking into the future. Who knows what life's going to look like in 2024, and who knows even if this Parliament's going to go that long. But I wonder if Labour might have more electoral success by replacing the leader at the 11th hour. Food for thought.
It's a possibility, but the question, of course, is who would it be? And this is another point. If you were to go down the streets today and ask a member of the public to name a member of the shadow cabinet, how many do you reckon they could name? Oh,
probably less than one. I think everybody would. I certainly don't think even everybody would be able to name Keir Starmer. I mean, I've waxed lyrical on this podcast before about my love for Lisa Nandy, and how I think she would make a wonderful opposition leader and a wonderful prime minister. But we don't have long enough to talk about it in this podcast. But you're right. So just getting that name recognition out there, and I think that's what the speech did. Is trying to do anyway. He wants to frame himself in a positive light. He wants people to understand, where he's come from, and obviously he has to fight against that. The fact that a lot of people view him as an elite. He's got a knighthood. He's a lawyer, and how is he going to appeal to voters in those sort of red wall seats? And I think he took a good first step to doing it today. Whether it's too late remains to be seen.
Well, let's bear in mind the red wall collapsed. It had been shipping before, but it collapsed most notably in 2019 when the Tory leader was Boris Johnson, old Etonian.
Yeah.
So
who's hardly.
I don't think Keir Starmer's so-called elitist credentials are going to harm him that much.
No,
when it comes to the optics of that.
No, of course, but Boris Johnson, for all of his faults, has been very successful at least framing himself as the common man. I know he's far from it, but he is certainly more relatable to those sort of working class northern seats. than a posh lawyer from London. So it'll be interesting to see how Keir Starmer goes about courting that vote.
Okay. We'll be talking more about the party conferences in a later podcast. We have some stuff lined up, and we'll have articles out on Redaction Report as well. But just before we wrap things up, I have to ask Richard, have you bought any petrol recently?
I actually took my toddler to Thomasland in Birmingham on the weekend, so I did have to legitimately fill up my tank. It wasn't just a case of me buying £1.60 worth of petrol just as in a panic. But I had to go to 5 petrol stations to do it. So it's definitely concerning. And it's interesting that, you know, the government said don't panic buy, and obviously people went and panic bought because a government with a track record of not telling the truth such a long time, of course people aren't going to believe what they say. So I'm not surprised that we've got to this juncture. I just hope that from an everyday perspective that we can move forward from it fairly quickly, because it's quite annoying having to line up for an hour just to get some petrol.
Absolutely. I was stuck in traffic just the other day, and I was just sat there wondering what the hell's going on. Why am I in this long line of traffic? And I thought maybe there'd been an accident ahead or some sort of roadblock. Finally get past it. Yeah, it's a petrol station. There's been literally been queuing for about half an hour on a stretch of road that should have taken me 2 minutes to get along, because everyone was queuing at the bloody petrol station.
Absolute nightmare. And just one other thing I would like to say about it is I'm not, plenty of people out there who are saying it's the media that are fueling this, and no pun intended. And if the media weren't publicizing, long lines at petrol stations, then this wouldn't be a problem. That's definitely not how it's been going. I mean, the media are obviously reporting things that are happening. If there are long queues at petrol stations, the media are going to report that. So it's a little bit of a vicious cycle, and then obviously people see that, and obviously that it causes more queues. But equally, when Boris Johnson says everything is going to be fine, we've got a small supply issue for the next 10 days or so with extra, HGV drivers and things, but don't panic buy. Of course, the media are going to report that. That is a reportable. There's a public interest in us knowing about that. So it's definitely been disappointing to see sections of society saying, well, this is the media's fault. It's not the media's fault. It's the government's fault. And it's the media's job to be a thorn in the government's side by reporting this and putting pressure under them to make changes to this. So I hope to see less of that.
Unfortunately, we're well aware as journalists that sometimes it's a thankless job. But
indeed.
Yeah. But at any rate, on that note, we're going to have to wrap up there. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in once again. Like I say, we are going to be making this as regular as we can. Sometimes some of us will be away, unfortunately, but for the most part, this will be a weekly show. Please like and subscribe. We're on all the social media channels, so please follow us there. And until next time, see you soon.
Bye.